Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to be with you today, talking about a focus that has been my passion for 40 years. My name is Lobna Youssef, and I am teaching you a course entitled Essay 1. Now, Essay 1 is an academic writing course. When we say academic, we mean university level writing. With university level writing, there are a lot of issues that we need to bear in mind. We need to bear in mind that we're learning to write in English, although English is not our native language. Our native language in Arabic, and when we write in Arabic, we use the field of knowledge called balagha. The similar field of knowledge in English and in other European languages is known as rhetoric. So logically, balagha and rhetoric are similar, but they're also different. When we study balagha in school, there are rules, there are a sequence of development that is different from rhetoric. So balagha started in the Arabian Peninsula, even before Arabic became the established language of the peninsula, and rhetoric started in the Greek era of Aristotle and Plato. Now, why is this course important? It is important because when we submit any document, we submit it in writing. And if we submit something in writing in English, we have to follow the rules that the English and the Western world uses. Now, this focus has a long past and a very rich present. On the screen, you will realize that we'll talk about many definitions and that we're going to deal with writing as a process. Steps. In order to write, we need to read, we need to think, we need to start writing, and then we look at what we've written again and we revise it thoroughly so there are no mistakes and so that our reader understands us. At this point, we're going to start by dealing with the past before we focus on what is happening today and how we reached to what is happening today. Now, in Egypt, most students we teach, if not all students, study balagha in school. How does this affect the way Egyptians think and write? Students in school write compositions in she'r. Did any of our teachers discuss the definitions of these terms? To compose means to create, to construct, to structure, to form by putting pieces together. And to compose can also mean to write a piece of music. So when we compose a paragraph, it has to have form and content. And there are rules for form and there are rules for content. Now, we're going to say more about the past. Why is this? Because the past affects the present. When we study balagha in school, we focus on poetry rather than prose. We focus on classical rather than modern poetry. Now, in Arabic poetry, the line is the unit, divided into two independent and sometimes interdependent hemistichs. Therefore, students cannot easily digest the idea of form when we write in English. So the line is the unit. In English, the sentence is the unit. In Arabic, there is no punctuation in poetry. In English, there has to be punctuation. This is why what we study in school affects what we do at university. So students, when they write in English, they do not use punctuation. They do not use capital letters. Now, this is a problem when they write in English, but not a problem when they write in Arabic. Now, let's look at those two Arabic lines of poetry by Hafiz Ibrahim, sung by Kulthum. وقف الخلق ينظرون جميعا كيف أبني قواعد المجد وحدي. So this is a line that is complete. No punctuation, no capital letters. We cannot do this in English. And this line affects the way we think and the way we write in English. This has to change. Now, Ahmad Rami says, مصر التي في خاطري وفي دمي أحبها من كل روحي ودمي. Now, again, similarly, no punctuation, no capital letters. Now, those two lines affected us as students, and they affected what happened in Tahrir when the protesters said, الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام. وإذا الشعب يوما أراد الحياة فلا بد أن يستجيب القدر. Because what we studied in school has an effect on our culture and our identity. It is engraved in our minds. And it has a form that is different than the form that is used in English. The solution is to read an English sonnet, for example, and to compare between an English sonnet and the argument of the English sonnet and the two poems and the two lines of poetry introduced by Hafiz Ibrahim and Ahmad Rami. Now, when we write in English, we have to follow the rules of the English. When we write in Arabic, we have to follow the rules of the Arabic. Now, there are also other changes that happened in English writing. Before the 1980s, when writers wrote compositions or essays, they used the expository system, the narrative system, the descriptive system, and the argumentative system. Now, this changed. And in the 1990s, and this is clear in the critical reader by Lutz and Brent, that those four modes, the expository, the narrative, the descriptive, and the argumentative, became 8. So we have narration, description, comparison and contrast, cause and effect, classification, process analysis, definition, and argument. Now, why are these important? Because these are ways to structure what you write. Now, the word structure is extremely important. We borrow this word from engineering, and it is linked to the word composition, to compose. So when we structure a paragraph, when we structure a building, we have to have foundations. And therefore, before writing, we have to read. We have to know what we're going to write about, and we have to decide what is the mode, what is the system we are going to use in writing. Are we going to tell a story? Are we going to describe? Are we going to compare one thing to another, a character to another, a country to another, a system of education to another? Are we going to talk about cause and effect? Are we going to classify? In order to study in an academic institution, in a university, we look at the different institutions. We study them and we classify them in order to make a choice. Now, when we have a problem, we need process, and we analyze the steps of the process in order to solve the problem. When we have a term like balagha or rhetoric, we need to define the term. When we write, we have to have an argument. And that's the target, that's the purpose of writing. We have to have a point of view. We have to express this point of view clearly, and we have to provide analysis, evidence, and support for this point of view in order to convince the reader. Ladies and gentlemen, we mentioned the 8 rhetorical modes, and the focus is on argument. The field of knowledge that we are dealing with is known as rhetoric, and this field was defined by Aristotle in the Greek era, and in the 20th century it was developed into the rhetorical situation, and the rhetorical situation discussed the 8 rhetorical modes with a focus on argument. Now, in the United States of America, the writing courses in English are called Rhetoric and Composition. Now, the word rhetoric is a tricky word because it has a bad meaning, and this bad meaning implies that the person who is using rhetoric is just using words that are not really important, that are decorative, that are insignificant, that have a lot of praise that is not really meaningful. But the other meaning of rhetoric as a field of knowledge is what we are concerned about here. Now, according to Aristotle, rhetoric is the study of an art. What kind of an art is it? It is the art of communication. Now, it is not simply communication, but it is communication that is effective. So, when I talk to someone, what I say is meaningful, they understand me, and my hope is to convince this person with the point of view that I would like them to adopt. So, for example, if you are a student and you want to study and you need money from your father, you are going to try to convince your father to give you money in order to achieve the success you want to achieve, in order to have a better future. If you are a person who wants a good job and you go for an interview, you are going to try to convince the person who is interviewing you that you will be the best person for the job. So in this case, the communication is oral. But then there is also written communication when you are asked to convince a reader of a point of view. For example, there is a problem, and you have a point of view about how to solve this problem. So you introduce the reader to the problem and to the steps that you think will help in solving these problems. Now, the art of discovering all the available means of persuasion in any given case. Now, this is another definition of rhetoric by Aristotle, and it is an extremely important definition because it still focuses on the idea that rhetoric and writing is an art. But what kind of an art? it's an art of discovery. So you explore, you investigate the issue that you want to deal with, and you see how different people before you have convinced others of their point of view, and you try to adopt this situation or this mode. Now, another definition of rhetoric is it's an art, it's a practice, and it's the study of human communication. This is a definition by Andrea Lansford. Now, again, Andrea Lansford insists that writing is an art, but it's also a practice. It means that you write and you make mistakes and you correct these mistakes and you write again in order to improve your way of convincing others of the point you want to make. Now, Andrea adds a third point. It is the study of human communication. So in order to communicate effectively, you try to find out how others before you have communicated and how they succeeded, why they failed, and of course you try to avoid the ways people have used and failed. Now, one very important issue that I would like to focus on here is I used Aristotle and I used Andrea Lansford. Why did I do this? Because I want to tell my reader and my listener that these are not my own words. These are the words of specialists in the field of rhetoric, and I have to quote them. I have to mention what they said exactly as they said it, and therefore I have to use quotation marks. This is called academic integrity, النزاهة الأكاديمية, and we're going to have a very special course on academic integrity later. Ladies and gentlemen, we discussed rhetoric and writing composition in the past. We moved on to the present and to why this focus is important, because this focus is about communication, and we are communicating all the time. Now, when we communicate in Arabic, we think of the very important Arabic saying, خير الكلام ما قل ودل ولكل مقام مقال. So this is a very important quotation in Arabic, so that people in the modern time cannot waste time. They have to say exactly what they want to say. They have to say it clearly, and they have to say it convincingly. The same idea is in rhetoric, that when we are trying to convince someone, we are thinking of what our point of view is and how we can say it correctly in a correct English grammatical sentence. So when we are writing, do we use rhetoric or do we use balagha? Of course, it depends on the language we're using and the audience who are listening to us. So if we're talking to a foreigner, we are using balagha. If we're talking to our father, our wife, our husband, we are using the field of knowledge known as balagha. So it depends on the language we're using and on the audience we are addressing. Now, one excellent feature about Egyptians is they enjoy studying languages. And here you are in Egypt studying English. And therefore, you are not monolingual. Mono means one, and lingual means language. So you're not only interested in one language, which is Arabic, but you are bilingual. You are interested in both Arabic and English, and therefore you have to study both balagha and rhetoric, and you have to make use of those two fields of knowledge when you are writing and communicating. Now, again, what is rhetoric? It is an art. We agreed from our previous lessons that Aristotle in the past and Andrea Lansford at present refers to rhetoric as an art that involves communication. Now, communication means you have an audience. You're talking to someone. Who are you talking to? Who is your audience? Is your audience your neighbor, a member of your family? Of course, this is different than if you're talking to a large audience, all right? So if you're talking to a large audience, you have a message that is different from the message you are using if you're talking to one person or two. Now, the rhetorical situation, it means the time and place in which we use rhetoric, in which we use the art of conversation. The rhetorical situation involves three elements. The first element is there is a writer or a speaker, and the writer or the speaker addresses a reader and an audience. Now, what is the purpose of addressing this audience? The purpose is to convince this audience. Now, in order to convince this audience, what do you do? How can you be effective? Now, this is a skill that has to be acquired. Now, the skill is to think about what Aristotle called the three appeals. Now, what are these three appeals? To appeal to someone means to attract their attention. So, when you're attracting someone's attention, you have three ways of attracting attention, according to Aristotle. You have logos, when you attract the person's mind or the mind of the audience, logos, logic, or you deal with ethics, the character, your character and the characters of the listeners, and pathos. Pathos means passion. So we have logos, logic, ethos, ethics or character, pathos, passion. Now, passion means emotions. So when you're communicating with someone, are you addressing their mind? Are you addressing their heart? Or are you addressing the issues that you have in common? Common problems of education in Egypt, for example, common problems of pollution, or common problems at work, or achievements, accomplishments, progress and development that we all share. Now, logos, logic, reasoning, argument, facts and figures, statistics, definitions, theories, structure, references, and we don't make flaws. We don't make mistakes in talking to people if we want to convince their minds. Now, passion involves a personal experience, values, beliefs, stories, and ethos involves what you say in order to be trustworthy. So you have to be honest, you have to have confidence, you have to be analytical, so that you convince the reader with the point that you would like to make.